Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Back in 2015, I met Emily in college. She was smart, funny, and we connected instantly. By 2019, we were pretty serious, and I genuinely believed she was the one I'd spend the rest of my life with. I worked tirelessly at my factory job, saving every penny to buy her an engagement ring. My plan was to propose on Christmas at her parents' house, a perfect moment surrounded by family, cozy and festive. Emily's family was an interesting mix. Her dad, Max, was chill, quiet, and respectful, a genuinely good guy. Her sister, Kimberly, was super sweet and always supportive. But then there was Amanda, Emily's mom. She couldn't stand me. No matter how much effort I put in, nothing I did was ever good enough for her. She'd make cutting remarks, saying Emily deserved better, or that I was just some guy with no ambition. Emily would brush it off, telling me, "That's just how my mom is." I didn't fully buy it, but I kept trying because I loved Emily and hoped Amanda would eventually come around. For Christmas that year, I went all out with gifts for her family. I got Kimberly a laptop for college since she'd been talking about how much she needed one, a nice barbecue grill for Max, and an expensive scarf for Amanda. Honestly, the scarf stretched my budget, but I thought it might soften her attitude toward me. Emily was supposed to join us later after her hospital shift, so I went ahead and handed out the gifts. Kimberly was overwhelmed and started crying when she saw the laptop. She hugged me, saying it was the nicest thing anyone had ever done for her. Max looked genuinely thrilled with the grill, and even Amanda managed a forced thank you for the scarf. For a moment, I thought things might finally be turning around. But then Kimberly started acting strangely. She kept glancing at me, her eyes flicking between me and Max, like she was wrestling with whether or not to say something. Eventually, Kimberly pulled me aside into her room. Max followed, looking confused. Kimberly was already tearing up as she said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't want to ruin this, but I can't keep it in anymore." I had no idea what she meant until she handed me a pregnancy test. I just stared at it, completely frozen. It felt like my brain had short-circuited. "It's Emily," she said. "I found it last month." Then came the bombshell. Kimberly revealed that Emily had been cheating on me since the beginning of the year, with a guy Amanda, her mom, had introduced her to. Kimberly said Emily begged her to keep it a secret because she was figuring things out. I couldn't even speak. My chest tightened. My hands were shaking and my vision blurred. Max placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Son, I'm sorry. I understand if you need to leave." That snapped me out of it. I nodded, thanked Kimberly for telling me, and shook Max's hand. As I walked out of the room, I glanced at Amanda. She was sitting on the couch, sipping wine, completely unfazed. I didn't say anything to her. I didn't trust myself not to explode. The drive home was a blur. By the time I got back to my apartment, I was trembling, consumed by a mix of rage and heartbreak. I called my family and told them everything. My mom was furious, saying, "You're better off without her." My sisters were ready to go confront and even beat up Emily, but I told them to let it go. All I wanted was to move on. That night, around 11 p.m., Emily started blowing up my phone, sending text after text. "I can explain. Please, please, just let me talk to you." I didn't respond. The next morning, I changed my number, deleted my social media, and began erasing her from my life. It hurt like hell, but one thing was clear. I deserved better. After Christmas, I felt like I was in survival mode. Cutting Emily off wasn't just about ignoring her calls and texts. It was about protecting myself from everything she represented. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was humiliated, angry, and stuck replaying every moment of our relationship, trying to figure out how I had missed the signs. She tried everything to get in touch, calling from blocked numbers, sending emails, and even reaching out to my family. Every message was the same. "It's not what it looks like," or "You're misunderstanding everything." I didn't bother responding. What was there to misunderstand? She cheated, got pregnant, and lied about it. End of story. I spent a lot of time with my family in those first few weeks. My mom, being the nurturing force she is, made sure I was eating and sleeping. My sisters, on the other hand, were more direct, bluntly telling me things like, "Dude, she's trash. She doesn't deserve a second of your time." Their honesty helped a lot. They reminded me that I wasn't the problem. She was. To keep myself busy, I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts at the factory, not just to distract myself, but to rebuild my savings. The money I'd spent on the ring was gone, but that didn't sting as much as losing the life I'd thought I was building with Emily. I realized I needed to focus on myself, so I started doing things I hadn't in a while. I joined a local basketball league, reconnected with friends, and even tried learning how to cook. Spoiler alert, I'm still terrible at it, but it's fun. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like I was healing. Then, in mid-2020, I got some unexpected news. A mutual friend texted me out of the blue, saying, "Hey, did you hear about Emily?" I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the best of me. The friend told me that Emily's affair partner had ghosted her after finding out he was the father of her baby. Apparently, he wanted nothing to do with her or the child. Now, Emily was a single mom, trying to figure things out on her own. Honestly, I didn't feel much. A small part of me felt satisfied, like that's what you get, but mostly, I just felt indifferent. Her drama wasn't my problem anymore, and I was relieved to be out of the mess. A couple of months later, Emily somehow got my new number. She called, begging to talk. I don't know why I answered, but I regretted it immediately. She launched into a long apology, saying she'd made a mistake and wanted to explain. I let her talk for a bit before cutting her off. "Emily," I said, "I don't care anymore. Whatever you have to say won't change anything. We're done." That's when she switched tactics, trying to guilt-trip me. She said I owed her this and that I was being unfair by refusing to hear her out. I told her flat out, "I don't owe you anything. You made your choices. Now live with them." Then I hung up. Not long after, Amanda got involved. She sent me a string of texts, calling me a coward and saying I was running away from my responsibilities. I couldn't believe the audacity. Responsibilities? I wasn't the one who cheated. I wasn't the one who got someone else pregnant. I blocked Amanda's number too, but for a while, it felt like they were everywhere, trying to drag me back into their chaos. Every time they reached out, it only made my decision to cut them off feel more right. I didn't want their explanations. I didn't need closure. I just wanted to move on, and eventually, I did. The calls stopped. The texts stopped. My days started to feel lighter. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over my life again. Then, Mother's Day came around, and I was looking forward to spending it with my mom and one of my sisters, Raven. My mom has always been the heart of our family, and after everything that had happened, I wanted to make the day special for her. We decided to grab lunch at Red Lobster, since seafood is her favorite. It was supposed to be a calm, drama-free day. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. We were finishing up and about to leave when I saw them. Amanda and Kimberly, of all people, in all places. They had to show up there. My stomach dropped. Kimberly looked like she wanted to melt into the floor when she saw me, but Amanda? She locked eyes with me and immediately wore that familiar look of disdain. I could feel Raven tensing up beside me. She's always been protective of me, and I knew she was ready to go off. Amanda's expression shifted the moment she noticed Raven. She looked confused, almost shocked, like she was piecing something together. That's when I realized she must have finally figured out that Raven was my sister, the same other woman she'd accused me of cheating with. The audacity of it all almost made me want to laugh. Raven muttered under her breath, "Do you want me to handle her?" I shook my head. The last thing I wanted was a public scene. My mom gave Amanda a cold, hard look before nudging me forward. "Let's just go," she said. But then Kimberly stepped forward, practically begging. "Please, can we talk? Just for a minute alone?" Raven wasn't having it. "Why would he want to talk to you?" she snapped. Kimberly looked genuinely upset, and my mom stepped in, suggesting that I hear her out, away from Amanda. I agreed more out of curiosity than anything else. Kimberly pulled me aside far enough that Amanda couldn't hear us. She immediately apologized for everything that had happened. "I'm so sorry for how things turned out," she said. "I miss having you around. You were like a brother to me." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded and let her continue. She told me that Emily had been miserable since I left, crying all the time and saying she regretted everything. "I'm sorry she's struggling," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "But that's not my problem anymore. She made her choices." Kimberly nodded, then told me something that made my stomach twist. "She destroyed the laptop you gave me," she said quietly. "It happened right after you left. She was mad at me for telling you the truth. That hurt. I had given her that laptop with genuine care, and Emily had ruined it out of spite. Before I left, there was something I'd been wondering since Christmas, so I finally asked Kimberly, "Why does your mom hate me so much? What did I ever do to her?" Kimberly hesitated before admitting, "She thought you were cheating. She saw you with another woman, Raven. She didn't know you were siblings." My jaw dropped. All of this, the cheating, the pregnancy, the heartbreak, started because Amanda jumped to conclusions and convinced Emily that I was unfaithful. I couldn't help but laugh. It was so stupid, so unnecessary, and yet it ruined everything. Thanks for telling me, I said. And hey, the laptop's warranty is still good. You can probably get it fixed. Kimberly's face lit up, and for a moment, I saw the kind, shy girl I used to know. We hugged briefly, and I left to rejoin my mom and Raven. When I told them what Kimberly had said, Raven rolled her eyes. So Amanda's not just a jerk, she's also an idiot. Good to know. My mom sighed and said, Michael, you're better off without those people in your life. She was right. I'd spent so much time trying to make things work with Emily and her family, but it was clear now that they weren't worth the effort. A few days after running into Kimberly and Amanda at Red Lobster, Kimberly called me. She wanted help with the laptop warranty I'd mentioned, and since she had been one of the few decent people in that family, I agreed to meet her at a local electronics store. When I got there, Max was with her, which honestly was a nice surprise. Max had always been solid. Out of all the chaos, he had been the only one to offer me a genuine apology. On Christmas, we chatted while sorting out the laptop. Max thanked me again for the grill I gave him, saying how much he loved using it. Kimberly was quieter, but seemed relieved to have someone helping her out. It felt nice, almost normal. Afterward, Max suggested we grab lunch as a thank you, and I agreed, thinking it would be a good opportunity to catch up. We went to a small nearby restaurant, and for the first time in ages, I wasn't thinking about Emily or all the drama. Max talked about his plans to redo their backyard, and Kimberly mentioned how school was going, though it was clear she was still dealing with tension at home. It was a surprisingly good time. Then, just as we were finishing up, I heard someone call my name. I looked up and there she was, Emily. My heart sank. She looked rough, tired, and stressed, like she'd aged years since I last saw her. Part of me felt sorry for her, but the other part was just annoyed that she showed up and ruined what had been a peaceful afternoon. Hi, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at Max and Kimberly, then back at me. Can we talk? I stayed seated and crossed my arms. What do you want, Emily? She hesitated, then stepped closer. I just want to explain. Please. I've been trying to talk to you for months. I sighed. You've got 5 minutes. Go. She launched into an apology, saying she made a mistake and regretted everything. Then she said, My mom convinced me you were cheating. She said she saw you with another woman. I cut her off. You mean my sister? That's who Amanda saw. Raven is my sister, Emily. If you'd bothered to ask instead of jumping to conclusions, we wouldn't even be here right now. Emily's face fell. I didn't know. I thought she trailed off, looking completely lost. I should have talked to you, she said softly. I shook my head. No, you just cheated, I said flatly, for almost a year. Instead of trusting me, you lied, slept with someone else, and got pregnant. And now you expect me to care about your excuses? Her voice cracked as she said, I wasn't happy. I didn't know what to do. You could have talked to me, I snapped. You could have ended things if you weren't happy, but instead, you went behind my back. That's on you. Max and Kimberly sat there awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Emily started crying, which might have worked on me years ago, but not anymore. Please, she begged. I want to fix this. I'll do anything. I shook my head. There's nothing to fix, Emily. You destroyed everything. I've moved on, and so should you. That's when she dropped the real bomb. But my son, he needs a father. He needs stability. I blinked, stunned by her audacity. Your son is not my responsibility. That's for you and his actual father to figure out. Oh, wait. He ran off. Didn't he? Sounds like a pattern. Emily flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she looked at me with tear-filled eyes and said, Why are you being so mean? Mean? I repeated. Emily, I worked overtime to save for a ring because I thought we had a future together. I planned to buy a house and start a family with you, and you threw it all away. You don't get to call me mean for refusing to clean up your mess. She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Max finally stepped in, saying, Emily, I think it's time to go. You need to respect his boundaries. She turned to Kimberly, desperate for backup. Kimberly, you understand, don't you? You know I regret everything. Kimberly hesitated before responding. Emily, you're my sister, and I love you. But you made your choices. You can't expect him to just forget everything. Emily stared at Kimberly like she'd been betrayed, then stormed out of the restaurant. I sat there, stunned and exhausted, while Max apologized again. I'm sorry she showed up, he said. You've been through enough. It's not your fault, I replied. You and Kimberly have been decent through all of this. That's more than I can say for the rest of your family. After lunch, I went home and told my family what happened. My dad laughed and said, Amanda probably thought kicking you out would solve her problems. Look how well that worked out for them. My mom just hugged me and said, I'm proud of you for standing your ground. You deserve better. It became clear to me then that Emily's apologies didn't matter. I didn't need closure from her. I had already given myself that by walking away. After the confrontation, I thought I might feel something. Relief, satisfaction, maybe even a sense of finality. But honestly, it felt empty. Closure wasn't what I expected. It wasn't neat or clean, and it didn't magically fix everything. Instead, it just reminded me of how much damage had been done and how pointless it all was. A couple of days later, Kimberly sent me a text thanking me for hearing her out and helping with the laptop. She said, I really miss having you around. You were like the brother I never had. That hit me harder than I thought it would. I replied, telling her I appreciated her honesty and that she didn't owe me an apology for Emily's mess. If anything, Kimberly had been the only one in that family who acted with integrity. Her message made me reflect on how much I'd lost, not just with Emily, but with the parts of her family I'd grown close to. Max had always treated me with respect, and Kimberly genuinely looked up to me. I hadn't realized how much I missed having people like them in my life until that lunch. But I also knew that staying in touch with them meant risking Emily finding ways to worm her way back into my life, and I wasn't willing to let that happen. A week later, a mutual acquaintance reached out to tell me more about Emily. Apparently, she was still trying to contact old friends of mine, hoping they would convince me to talk to her. She was struggling as a single mom, juggling work and raising her son alone after her affair partner completely ghosted her. I didn't feel vindicated hearing this. If anything, it just confirmed that walking away had been the right choice. Her life was her responsibility now, and I wanted no part in it. Then there was Amanda. I'd expected her to double down on her hatred for me, but surprisingly, she went quiet. I guess the confrontation at Red Lobster had left her with nothing else to say, or maybe she realized how much damage her lies had caused. Despite everything, one thing Emily said during the confrontation stuck with me. She claimed she only cheated because Amanda convinced her I was unfaithful. At first, I brushed it off as just another excuse, but the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Amanda had been meddling in our relationship from the start, planting seeds of doubt and pushing Emily to find someone better. But while Amanda played her part, Emily wasn't innocent. She made the choice to cheat, to hide it, and to lie her way out when she got caught. In the end, it didn't matter who was more at fault. Both Amanda and Emily were toxic in their own ways, and I was better off without either of them. That night, I sat down with my family and told them everything. My dad chuckled and said, Amanda was looking for any excuse to get rid of you. That woman was always full of it. Raven smirked and added, and yet, you're the one who came out ahead. Emily's stuck raising a kid alone, and Amanda's probably tearing her hair out trying to fix things. Meanwhile, you've got a clean slate. That's a win. My mom, as always, was the voice of reason. She hugged me and said, Michael, I'm proud of you for standing your ground. You didn't let them manipulate you, and that takes strength. I thought things were finally over with Emily and her family. I had moved on, found peace, and was focusing on myself. But of course, Amanda wasn't about to let things end quietly. A few weeks after the confrontation with Emily, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Michael, it's Amanda. Her sharp voice came through the line. I almost hung up right there, but curiosity got the better of me. What could she possibly want now? What do you want, Amanda? I said, already annoyed. We need to talk, she snapped, as if she was doing me a favor by calling. It's about Emily and the baby. I sighed. There's nothing to talk about. I've made my position clear. Goodbye. Wait, she barked before I could hang up. I'm not asking you to get back with Emily. I just think you should take responsibility for your part in this mess. That definitely caught my attention. My part? I asked, incredulously. What part is that, Amanda? I wasn't the one who cheated. I wasn't the one who lied. So please enlighten me. Amanda let out an exasperated sigh, as though I were the unreasonable one. Emily is struggling. She's a single mother because of a misunderstanding that could have been avoided if you just explained things to me from the start. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you seriously blaming me for Emily's affair? You were the one who introduced her to the guy. You were the one who convinced her I was cheating. Don't put this on me. But Amanda ignored me entirely. That baby needs a father, Michael. You were practically part of the family for years. It's time you stepped up and helped, if not for Emily, then for the child. I was stunned, unsure how to respond at first. When I finally found my voice, I said, Let me make this crystal clear. That baby is not mine. I owe you, Emily, and her kid absolutely nothing. And if you call me again, I'll block you just like I did before. Selfish boy, she hissed. Do you think you'll ever find someone better than Emily? She made a mistake, but she's still the best you'll ever do. You're throwing away a good woman over something so trivial. That was it. I laughed, a deep, belly laugh, because it was so ridiculous. Trivial? I repeated. Cheating for almost a year, lying about a pregnancy, and trying to manipulate me into staying. That's trivial to you? No wonder your family is such a mess. Before she could respond, I hung up and immediately blocked her number. I thought that would be the end of it, but of course, Amanda wasn't done. The next day, I got a call from Max. He sounded tired and stressed, which was unusual for him. Michael, I need to apologize in advance, he said. Amanda's been out of control. She's planning to come to your workplace. What? I asked, completely caught off guard. Why would she do that? She says you need to face her and take responsibility, Max explained. I've tried talking her out of it, but you know how she is. I groaned, already dreading the confrontation. Sure enough, later that afternoon, Amanda showed up at my job. She stormed into the office, demanding to see me. Thankfully, my manager intercepted her and asked what she wanted. I need to speak to Michael, Amanda said, loud enough for everyone to hear. It's a private family matter. I was in the back, but I could hear her clear as day. My manager came to get me, looking concerned. Do you know this woman? She asked. Unfortunately, yes, I replied. I'll handle it. When I walked out to meet Amanda, she immediately launched into her tirade. You've been ignoring me, and I won't stand for it, she said, glaring at me as if I were a misbehaving child. You're going to listen to what I have to say. No, I'm not, I replied calmly. You're on private property, and you're disrupting my workplace. Leave now, or I'll have security escort you out. That only seemed to make her angrier. You can't just ignore your responsibilities, Michael. I'll tell everyone here what kind of man you really are. I crossed my arms. Go ahead. Tell them how your daughter cheated on me, lied about her pregnancy, and tried to manipulate me. Let's see how much sympathy you get. Amanda's face turned bright red, and for a moment, I thought she might actually explode. You're a pathetic excuse for a man, she spat. I hope you end up alone because no decent woman will ever want you. Before I could respond, security arrived and escorted her out. My coworkers were clearly curious, but I just shrugged it off. Crazy X's mom. Long story. They didn't press further. Later that night, I received a text from Kimberly. She apologized profusely for her mom's behavior and said Max was furious with Amanda for embarrassing their family. She's out of control, Kimberly wrote. Max is thinking about filing for divorce because of this. I told Kimberly it wasn't her fault and that I didn't blame Max for wanting out. Amanda had caused nothing but chaos, and honestly, I felt bad for him. The whole situation left me emotionally drained, but it also reinforced one thing. I'd made the right decision by cutting Emily and her family out of my life. They were toxic, entitled, and incapable of taking responsibility for their actions. I wasn't about to let them drag me down with them. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We got a brand new story lined up for you today, and we're thrilled to have you here. We hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. Gregory Reed's Toyota Camry rolled to a stop in front of his modest two-story home. The engine's low rumble fading into the quiet suburban afternoon. The history teacher's fingers drummed on the steering wheel, a mix of excitement and fatigue coursing through him. The conference had wrapped up early, a stroke of luck that allowed him to surprise Natasha with his unexpected return. As he killed the engine, Gregory's eyes narrowed at the sight of an unfamiliar Audi parked in their driveway. Its sleek lines and polished surface seemed out of place next to Natasha's practical sedan. Huh, he muttered, climbing out of his car. Maybe Linda from next door got a new ride. The thought felt hollow even as it formed, a feeble attempt to rationalize the unease growing in his gut. The house was quiet as he entered, the silence broken only by the soft thud of his bag hitting the hardwood floor. Gregory paused, listening intently. There it was, muffled voices drifting down from upstairs, barely audible but unmistakably present. His footsteps were deliberately slow and soft as he approached the stairs, each creak of the floorboards sounding like a thunderclap in the stillness. At the bottom of the staircase, Gregory tilted his head, straining to make out the words. Natasha's voice, low and sultry, reached his ears. I can't wait to see you tonight, baby. It's going to be wild. The words hung in the air, each syllable a dagger to Gregory's heart. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Not after 14 years of marriage. His mind raced, searching for an innocent explanation, but finding none. With each step up the stairs, the reality of the situation became harder to deny. He found Natasha in their bedroom, phone pressed to her ear, a coy smile playing on her lips, a smile he hadn't seen directed at him in months. Natasha, his voice cracked, betraying the turmoil within. She whirled around, eyes wide with shock, the smile vanishing instantly. Greg, I thought you weren't due back until tomorrow. Her voice was higher than usual, tinged with panic. Clearly, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The room seemed to spin around him, the familiar surroundings suddenly alien and hostile. Who were you talking to? Natasha's face hardened, her initial surprise morphing into defiance. The transformation was so sudden, so complete, that Gregory wondered if he'd ever really known her at all. It's none of your business, Greg, she spat, her tone dripping with contempt. None of my business? You're my wife, for Christ's sake. The words exploded from him, fueled by a mixture of pain and incredulity. How could she stand there, in the bedroom they shared, and tell him this was none of his business? Oh, grow up, Natasha sneered, rolling her eyes. The gesture was so dismissive, so callous, that Gregory felt as if he'd been physically struck. Did you really think I was going to be satisfied with your boring, predictable life forever? Gregory staggered back as if he'd been slapped, his mind reeling. What are you saying? The question was unnecessary. He knew exactly what she was saying. But some part of him, the part that still clung to the memory of their wedding day, of whispered promises and shared dreams, needed to hear it out loud. Natasha's laugh was sharp and cruel, a sound Gregory had never heard from her before. I'm saying I've found someone who actually excites me, someone who isn't afraid to live a little. She tossed her hair back, a gesture of defiance and superiority. You're having an affair? The words felt like ash in Gregory's mouth, bitter and choking. Affairs are for bored housewives, Natasha spat, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and what looked disturbingly like triumph. I'm embracing life. And tonight, I'm embracing my new lover. Gregory's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. Not after 14 years of marriage. Not to him. He'd been a good husband, hadn't he? Faithful, supportive, loving. Where had it all gone wrong? You can't be serious, he managed, his voice hoarse. You're not going anywhere. Natasha laughed again, the sound grating against Gregory's nerves. Oh, sorry, but I promised him a wild night. And unlike you, I keep my promises. The barb struck home, twisting in Gregory's chest like a knife. If you walk out that door, Gregory said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage, our marriage is over. 14 years, Natasha. Gone. It was meant to be an ultimatum, a line in the sand. But even as he said it, Gregory knew it was futile. Natasha shouldered past him, pausing only to grab her purse from the dresser. Maybe you should have made those 14 years count for something, she tossed over her shoulder, her words dripping with disdain. The front door slammed, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. Gregory stood frozen in the bedroom, the suddenly too large space mocking him with its emptiness. Natasha's laughter, cruel and triumphant, seemed to linger in the air, a ghostly reminder of how quickly his world had crumbled. As the reality of the situation began to sink in, Gregory felt his knees buckle. He sank onto the edge of their bed, and buried his face in his hands. How had he not seen this coming? How had he been so blind? The questions swirled in his mind, each one bringing a fresh wave of pain and disbelief. Outside, the sound of an engine roaring to life cut through his thoughts. Natasha's car, or perhaps the mysterious Audi, pulling away, carrying her towards her new life, her new lover, leaving Gregory behind with nothing but the shattered remains of the life he thought they'd built together. Sleep eluded Gregory that night, each tick of the bedside clock a mocking reminder of his solitude. He tossed and turned, his mind a whirlwind of memories and questions. The bed, once a sanctuary of comfort and intimacy, now felt vast and cold. How long had this been going on? How could he have been so blind? The questions circled endlessly, each one bringing a fresh wave of pain and disbelief. As the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, Gregory dragged himself out of bed. His reflection in the bathroom mirror was a stranger, hollow-eyed and haggard, with stubble shadowing his usually clean-shaven jaw. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to shock himself back to reality. But reality, he was learning, was a cruel and unforgiving thing. Downstairs, the kitchen stood silent, devoid of the usual morning bustle. No coffee brewing, no gentle clink of spoons against cereal bowls, no murmured conversations about the day ahead. Just emptiness and the harsh light of day that seemed to illuminate every crack in the facade of his marriage. Gregory's hands shook as he poured himself a cup of coffee, the bitter liquid a poor substitute for the comfort he craved. He needed answers, and he knew where to start looking. The home office had always been Natasha's domain, a space he respected out of trust and a belief in privacy within marriage. Now, that respect felt like a cruel joke, a weakness she had exploited. With a deep breath, Gregory pushed open the office door. The room was neat and organized, just as Natasha always kept it. But now, every orderly stack of papers, every carefully arranged knick-knack, seemed to mock him. He began rifling through drawers, searching for anything that might shed light on her betrayal. In the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, hidden beneath a stack of old tax returns, he found what he was looking for: credit card statements, carefully concealed from their joint account. His eyes widened as he scanned the charges: expensive restaurants, hotel stays, lavish gifts. All dated back months, possibly longer. Jesus, he muttered, sinking into the office chair. The affair hadn't just been going on for weeks or months. This was a long-term deception, a carefully orchestrated betrayal that spanned a significant portion of their marriage. The realization hit him like a physical blow, leaving him breathless and nauseous. As he sat there, trying to process the magnitude of Natasha's betrayal, something caught his eye, a faint glow coming from beneath a stack of papers on her desk. Gregory's hand trembled as he reached for it, already knowing what he would find. A burner phone. Of course, he should have known. It was almost comically cliché, like something out of a bad detective novel. But there was nothing funny about the sick feeling in his stomach as he turned it on. The screen lit up, revealing a cascade of text messages. His stomach churned as he scrolled through them, each one more intimate and explicit than the last. Pet names, inside jokes, plans for rendezvous, a whole secret life laid bare in digital form. And there, repeated over and over, was a name: James Humphrey. Gregory's breath caught in his throat. James Humphrey, Natasha's co-worker, the man Gregory had shared drinks with at the company Christmas party just months ago, the man who had shaken his hand, called him buddy, all while secretly carrying on an affair with his wife. The betrayal was suddenly, horrifyingly personal. Memories flooded back. Natasha's increased hours at work, her sudden interest in after-work drinks with colleagues, the way she and James had laughed together at that Christmas party. It all made sickening sense now. How many times had he stood by, smiling and unsuspecting, while they exchanged knowing glances? How many of their conversations had been laced with double meanings, inside jokes at his expense? Gregory's world, already teetering on the edge, came crashing down around him. He felt as if he were falling, spiraling into an abyss of betrayal and deceit. The room spun around him, the familiar surroundings suddenly alien and hostile. He barely made it to the bathroom before he was violently sick, his body purging itself as if it could somehow expel the pain and humiliation along with the contents of his stomach. As he slumped against the cool porcelain, Gregory felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The initial shock was passing, replaced by a cold, hard anger. He thought of his students, of the lessons he taught them about resilience in the face of adversity, about standing up for what was right. It was time to practice what he preached. With shaking hands, he reached for his phone. He had calls to make, plans to set in motion. Natasha might have betrayed him, but he'd be damned if he let her destroy him. As he dialed the first number, Gregory felt a determination settle over him. The battle for his future was just beginning. Morning found Gregory slumped at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his phone. The house around him was silent, the usual morning bustle replaced by an oppressive stillness that seemed to mock his solitude. He'd called in sick to work, unable to face his students in this state. The thought of standing in front of a classroom, discussing the great events of history while his own life lay in ruins, was more than he could bear. His mind raced with possible courses of action, each one more drastic than the last. Confront Natasha at her office? Track down James and demand an explanation? Simply pack his bags and disappear? The options swirled in his head. A dizzying array of potential futures, none of them resembling the life he'd thought he had just days ago. The buzz of his phone startled him out of his reverie. It was Michael Roy, his friend since college, and now a respected lawyer. Gregory had reached out to him in a moment of desperation the night before, his message a garbled mix of shock and plea for help. "Hey, Greg." Michael's voice was calm and steady, a lifeline in the chaos of Gregory's thoughts. "How are you holding up?" Gregory let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh in the quiet kitchen. "How do you think?" "Listen," Michael said, his tone shifting from friendly to professional. "I know you're hurting, but we need to approach this logically. Have you confronted Natasha again?" "No," Gregory admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "She didn't come home last night." The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of how quickly his life had unraveled. "Good," Michael said, and Gregory could almost see him nodding approvingly. "Don't confront her until we have a solid plan. For now, focus on gathering evidence. Bank statements, text messages, anything that proves the affair. We need to build a strong case." As Michael outlined the legal options, Gregory felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. This was no longer about saving his marriage. That ship had sailed the moment Natasha walked out the door. This was about survival, about emerging from this nightmare with his dignity and future intact. "What about the house?" Gregory asked, his eyes roaming over the familiar surroundings that now felt tainted by betrayal. "The savings? Our whole life is tied up together. One step at a time," Michael advised. "First, we document everything. Then we'll look at division of assets." "But Greg," his voice softened slightly, "are you sure you want to go through with this? There's no coming back once we start the legal process." Gregory's grip tightened on the phone. Was he sure? The question gave him pause. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine reconciliation. Natasha returning, apologetic and remorseful. The two of them working through this, rebuilding their marriage. But the fantasy crumbled as quickly as it formed, replaced by the cold reality of Natasha's sneering face, her callous words. "I'm sure," he said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. "She made her choice. Now I'm making mine." After hanging up, Gregory set to work with a single-minded focus that would have impressed his students. He meticulously copied financial records, saved text messages, and documented every scrap of evidence he could find. It was like conducting research for one of his history lessons, except this time, the subject was the destruction of his own life. Hours passed in a blur of paperwork and digital forensics. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the kitchen, when Gregory's phone buzzed again. A text from Natasha. "Working late again. Don't wait up." Gregory stared at the message, a mix of anger and resolve coursing through him. The casual tone, the blatant lie. It was all so breathtakingly audacious. Did she think he was still in the dark? Or did she simply not care anymore? He thought of the scout law he'd learned as a boy. Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Values he'd tried to live by, values he thought he shared with Natasha. Well, he thought bitterly it was time to add a new trait to that list: ruthless. Gregory's fingers hovered over the phone, tempted to fire back a response that would shatter Natasha's illusion of secrecy. But Michael's advice echoed in his mind. Don't confront her yet. Build the case. Be smart. With a deep breath, Gregory set the phone aside. He had work to do. Tomorrow, he would return to his classroom, face his students, and teach them about the great upheavals of history. And all the while, he would be planning his own revolution, the dismantling of the life he'd built with Natasha and the construction of something new from the ashes. As night fell, Gregory stood at the window, looking out at the quiet street. Somewhere out there, Natasha was with James, living her new life, oblivious to the storm that was brewing. Let her have her night, Gregory thought. The reckoning would come soon enough. With a smile, he turned away from the window and headed back to the office. There was still much to do, and the night was young. The Gregory Reed who had left for that conference just days ago was gone, replaced by a man tempered by betrayal and resolved to fight for his future. Gregory Reed stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the calendar on the wall. A week had passed since his world had imploded, each day a careful dance of normalcy and secret preparations. The red circle around today's date seemed to mock him, a stark reminder of the task ahead. He took a sip of coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. Natasha had always been the one to make the coffee. He pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the day's agenda. The bank would be his first stop. Gregory had spent hours poring over their financial records, calculating exactly half of their joint savings. It wasn't about greed. It was about survival. He'd be damned if he'd let Natasha's betrayal leave him destitute. As he rinsed his mug in the sink, Gregory caught sight of his reflection in the window. The man staring back at him was a stranger hollow-eyed, with a week's worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. He barely recognized himself. Good, he thought. Let Natasha come home to a stranger. Let her see what her betrayal had wrought. The drive to the bank was a blur, Gregory's mind racing with contingencies and worst-case scenarios. What if Natasha had beaten him to it? What if she'd already cleaned out their accounts? But the teller's smile was professional and untroubled as she processed his withdrawal. Gregory felt a twinge of guilt as he tucked the cashier's check into his briefcase. It felt like theft, even though he knew it was his right. His next stop was a real estate agent's office. The woman behind the desk, Sarah, greeted him with a warm smile that faltered slightly as she took in his haggard appearance. "Mr. Reed, are you all right?" Gregory managed a wan smile. "Just a rough week. You said on the phone you had some properties to show me." Sarah nodded, pulling out a folder. "Yes, I've got a few options that might suit your needs. You said you were looking for something modest, right? A fresh start." The words hit Gregory like a punch to the gut. A fresh start. As if 14 years of marriage could be wiped away that easily. "That's right," he said, his voice rough. "Something uncomplicated." As Sarah began to outline the various properties, Gregory found his mind wandering. He thought of the house he was leaving behind, the home he and Natasha had built together, the kitchen where they'd shared countless meals, the living room where they'd curled up on the couch, planning their future. All of it tainted now. All of it a lie. "Mr. Reed," Sarah's voice snapped him back to the present. "Did you hear me? I said this apartment might be perfect for you. It's paid month to month, so there's no long-term commitment." Gregory nodded, forcing himself to focus. "That sounds ideal. Can we go see it?" The apartment was small but clean, with a view of a nearby park. As Sarah pointed out its features, Gregory found himself imagining a life here, a life without Natasha, without betrayal. "I'll take it," he said, cutting Sarah off mid-sentence. She blinked, surprised. "Don't you want to think it over? Maybe discuss it with your wife." The question was like a knife twisting in his gut. Gregory managed a tight smile. "That won't be necessary. How soon can I move in? An hour later, Gregory stood in the empty apartment, key in hand. The bare walls and vacant rooms seemed to echo with possibility. He took a deep breath, feeling something close to peace for the first time in days. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Michael, his lawyer friend. Everything set? Gregory typed a quick response. All done. No turning back now. As he hit send, Gregory felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The pieces were in place. The stage was set. Let the next act begin. The house was quiet when Gregory returned, the silence heavy with anticipation. He moved through the rooms with purpose, gathering the last of his essential belongings. Each object he touched seemed to hold a memory, some bitter, some sweet, all of them painful now. The sun was setting when he heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. Gregory's heart raced, a mix of dread and determination coursing through him. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it, the moment of truth. Natasha's keys jingled in the lock. Gregory positioned himself in the living room, the divorce papers spread out on the coffee table before him. He heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Coming closer. Greg, Natasha's voice held a note of surprise. What are you doing sitting in the dark? Gregory reached out and flicked on the lamp beside him. Natasha blinked in the sudden light, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. What's all this? She asked, her tone dismissive. But Gregory could see the flicker of unease in her eyes. Divorce papers, Gregory said, his voice steady. I think it's time we stop pretending, don't you? Natasha's laugh was sharp and brittle. Don't be ridiculous, Greg. You're not going to divorce me. No. Gregory raised an eyebrow. Then perhaps you'd like to explain these? He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. Bank statements, credit card bills, phone records. All the evidence of her affair laid bare. The color drained from Natasha's face. You've been going through my things? Her voice rose, indignant. How dare you? How dare I? Gregory's laugh was harsh. That's rich, coming from you. How long has it been going on, Natasha? How long have you been screwing James behind my back? Natasha's eyes flashed with anger. You don't understand anything, Greg. James and I, we have something special. Something real. Something real? Gregory shook his head in disbelief. Was our marriage not real enough for you? 14 years, Natasha. 14 years of trust and commitment. Or was that all a lie, too? For a moment, Natasha's mask slipped. Gregory saw a flicker of something, regret, shame, cross her face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold determination. You want to know the truth, Greg? Fine. I've been unhappy for years. You and your safe, boring life. It was suffocating me. James makes me feel alive. Each word was like a dagger to Gregory's heart, but he steeled himself, refusing to let her see how deeply she'd wounded him. Well, I hope it was worth it, he said, his voice cold, because it's cost you everything. The house, our savings. I'm taking half of it all. It's only fair, don't you think? Panic flashed across Natasha's face. You can't do that. I can and I have, Gregory replied. It's all there in the papers. You might want to have your lawyer look them over. Oh, wait. I guess that would be a conflict of interest for James, wouldn't it? Natasha's composure crumbled. Her eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. This isn't fair, Greg. You can't just throw away 14 years of marriage. I didn't throw it away, Gregory said, his voice quiet but firm. You did, the moment you decided that your vows meant nothing. Natasha's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. For a moment, Gregory felt a pang of sympathy, but then he remembered the cruel laugh, the callous words she'd thrown at him a week ago. His heart hardened. Sign the papers, Natasha, he said. It's over. As Natasha sank onto the couch, her shoulders shaking with sobs, Gregory felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The confrontation he dreaded for days was over. The truth was out. Now, all that was left was to pick up the pieces and move forward. Alone, The news of Gregory and Natasha's impending divorce spread through their social circle like wildfire. It seemed that everyone had an opinion, a side to choose, a judgment to pass. Gregory sat in his new apartment, staring at his phone as it buzzed with yet another message. This one was from Sarah, a mutual friend he and Natasha had known for years. "Greg, I just heard. I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do..." He sighed, tossing the phone aside. The messages had been pouring in all week, some supportive, some accusatory, all of them exhausting. It seemed that Natasha had been busy, spinning her own version of events. According to her, Gregory had been controlling, suffocating her with his mundane lifestyle. She painted herself as the victim, trapped in a loveless marriage, finally finding happiness with James. It was a compelling narrative, one that many of their friends seemed all too willing to believe. Gregory's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Michael. "How are you holding up?" his lawyer friend asked when Gregory answered. Gregory let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, just great. Half our friends think I'm some kind of monster, and the other half are too afraid of taking sides to even talk to me. But other than that, I'm peachy." Michael's voice was sympathetic but firm. "Remember what we talked about, Greg. Don't engage. Don't try to defend yourself. The truth will come out in time." "Easy for you to say," Gregory muttered. "You're not the one being vilified." After hanging up, Gregory paced the small apartment, feeling caged. He needed to get out, to do something, anything to escape the suffocating weight of his thoughts. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door, only to freeze as he opened it. Standing in the hallway, hand raised to knock, was Linda, his next-door neighbor from his old house. "Greg," she said, her eyes wide with surprise. I wasn't sure you'd be here." Gregory stepped back, gesturing for her to come in. "Linda, what are you doing here?" Linda fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable. "I wanted to talk to you about everything that's happened." As they sat on Gregory's sparse furniture, Linda's eyes darted around the apartment, taking in the boxes still unpacked, the general air of impermanence. "Greg, I don't know what to say. Natasha's been telling everyone such horrible things about you, but I couldn't believe it. Not the Greg I've known for years." Gregory felt a lump form in his throat. Here, finally, was someone who wasn't buying into Natasha's lies. "Thank you, Linda," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You have no idea how much that means to me." Linda reached out, patting his hand. "I know it's not my place, but is there any chance of reconciliation? Maybe if you two just talked." Gregory shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "It's too late for that, Linda. The trust is gone. There's no coming back from what she's done." As Linda left, promising to stay in touch, Gregory felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, not all was lost. There were still people who believed in him, who saw through Natasha's lies. But the relief was short-lived. The next day, as Gregory walked into the teacher's lounge at school, he was met with uncomfortable silence. Conversation stopped abruptly. Eyes darted away from his. He poured himself a cup of coffee, acutely aware of the whispers starting up behind him. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of two of his colleagues, their heads bent close together. "I heard he was cheating on her for years," one whispered. "Poor Natasha. No wonder she left him." The words hit Gregory like a physical blow. He stumbled out of the lounge, barely making it to his classroom before the tears came. As he sat at his desk, struggling to compose himself before his students arrived, Gregory felt the full weight of his new reality crash down upon him. This wasn't just about losing Natasha. It was about losing his entire life as he knew it. But as the first bell rang and students began to file in, Gregory took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders. He may have lost much, but he still had his integrity. He still had the truth. And someday, somehow, that truth would come out. Until then, he would hold his head high and face each day with dignity. It was all he had left. Gregory Reed stood at the back of the crowded gymnasium, watching as the school board members shuffled papers and cleared their throats. The air was thick with tension, and Gregory could feel the anxiety radiating from his colleagues. Principal Dawson stepped up to the microphone. As you all know, our district is facing severe budget cuts due to the recent economic downturn. We've been asked to reduce our staff by 15% across all departments. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Gregory's stomach churned. As one of the newer teachers in the history department, he knew his position was precarious. We'll be evaluating each position carefully, Dawson continued, her voice straining to sound reassuring. Seniority will be a factor, but not the only one. Performance reviews, student feedback, and extracurricular involvement will all be considered. Gregory's mind raced. He'd always received positive reviews, and his students seemed to enjoy his classes. But would it be enough? The mortgage on his new apartment loomed large in his thoughts. As the meeting adjourned, Gregory found himself cornered by Tom Halsey, the department head. "Greg," Tom said, his voice low, "I won't sugarcoat it. You're on the bubble. If you want to keep your job, you need to make yourself indispensable. Take on extra duties, start a new club, anything to stand out." Gregory nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I understand, Tom. I'll do whatever it takes." As he walked to his car, Gregory's phone buzzed. A text from Michael, his lawyer. "Natasha's contesting the settlement. She's hired Jameson. We need to talk." Gregory's heart sank. Stanley Jameson was known as a shark in divorce court, aggressive and ruthless. This was going to get ugly. The next few weeks were a blur of late nights and early mornings. Gregory threw himself into his work, volunteering for every committee and extracurricular activity he could. He started a debate club, organized a field trip to the state capitol, and even coached the JV basketball team when the regular coach fell ill. But even as he fought to keep his job, the specter of the divorce battle loomed large. Jameson was living up to his reputation, contesting every aspect of the settlement and dragging Gregory's name through the mud. One afternoon, as Gregory was grading papers in the teacher's lounge, he overheard two colleagues whispering. "I heard his wife left him because he was emotionally abusive," one said. "Can you believe it? He always seemed so nice." "Well, you never know what goes on behind closed doors," the other replied. "I feel bad for her, having to work with that James guy now that everyone knows about the affair." Gregory's pen froze mid-sentence. He'd known Natasha was telling her version of events, but he hadn't realized how far the rumors had spread. The urge to stand up and defend himself was overwhelming, but Michael's words echoed in his head. "Don't engage. Let the truth come out in its own time." With a heavy heart, Gregory gathered his things and left the lounge, the whispers following him down the hall. That night, as he sat in his sparse apartment, Gregory felt the weight of his challenges crushing down on him. His job was at risk. His reputation was in tatters, and the woman he'd loved for 14 years was doing everything in her power to destroy him. For a moment, he considered giving up. Maybe he should just let Natasha have what she wanted, move to a new town, start over completely. But then his eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk. It was from last year's graduation, showing him surrounded by smiling students. They were looking at him with admiration, trust, and respect. Gregory's jaw clenched. No! He wouldn't give up. He'd fight. For his job, for his reputation, and for the truth. Natasha might have betrayed him, but he wouldn't betray himself or the students who counted on him. With renewed determination, Gregory opened his laptop and began planning his next move. The law offices of Branson and Associates were imposing all gleaming glass and polished marble. Gregory felt distinctly out of place as he followed Michael down the long hallway to the conference room. "Remember," Michael muttered as they approached the door, "let me do the talking. Jameson's looking for any reason to paint you as the bad guy." Gregory nodded, straightening his tie. He'd borrowed the suit from Tom Halsey, not wanting to appear in the same clothes he'd worn to the last mediation session. Every detail mattered now. As they entered the room, Gregory's eyes immediately locked with Natasha's. For a moment, he saw a flicker of something. Regret? Uncertainty? But then her face hardened, and she turned away. Jameson was already talking, his voice oily and condescending. "Now, Mr. Reed, I hope you reconsidered your position on the division of assets. My client has been more than generous, considering the circumstances." Michael's reply was calm but firm. "I'm afraid we'll have to disagree on that point, Mrs. Jameson. In fact, we have some new information that might change the entire landscape of these proceedings." Gregory watched as Michael slid a manila folder across the table. Jameson opened it, his eyebrows rising as he scanned the contents. "Where did you get this?" Jameson demanded, his composure slipping. "That's not important," Michael replied smoothly. "What matters is what those documents show. Your clients have been less than truthful about their financial situation." Gregory's heart raced as he realized what was happening. During the discovery phase, Michael had uncovered discrepancies in Natasha and James's financial records. Digging deeper, they'd found evidence of embezzlement, company funds being siphoned off to finance their affair. Natasha's face had gone pale. "What is he talking about?" she hissed at Jameson. But Gregory wasn't listening to their frantic whispers. His mind was reeling with the implications of what he'd just learned. Natasha and James hadn't just betrayed him emotionally, they'd committed a crime. As the meeting devolved into chaos, with Jameson demanding to know the source of the information and Michael calmly deflecting, Gregory felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. For the first time since this nightmare began, he held the upper hand. But with that power came a heavy ethical dilemma. What should he do with this information? The right thing would be to report it to the proper authorities. But a darker part of him whispered that this was a leverage he needed to end this battle once and for all. That night, Gregory paced his apartment, weighing his options. The photo of his students caught his eye again, and he paused. What example would he be setting if he used this information for personal gain? How could he look those kids in the eye and teach them about integrity if he compromised his own? With a heavy sigh, Gregory picked up his phone. He'd make an anonymous tip to the company's board of directors, let them investigate and handle it properly. As he dialed the number, Gregory felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He might lose some tactical advantage in the divorce proceedings, but he'd keep his conscience clear. And in the end, that was worth more than any settlement. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The company launched an internal investigation, putting Natasha and James under intense scrutiny. Gregory threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, determined to prove his worth to the school. He volunteered to lead a curriculum review committee, putting in long hours to modernize the history department's approach. He organized a school-wide mock election to coincide with the real one, engaging students in the democratic process in a way that had the whole school buzzing. One afternoon, as Gregory was leaving a particularly grueling department meeting, Tom Halsey pulled him aside. "I don't know how you're doing it, Greg," Tom said, shaking his head in admiration. "With everything going on in your personal life, most people would be falling apart. But you're thriving." Gregory managed a small smile. "I guess I just realized that my work, my students, they're what really matter. Everything else is just noise." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, keep it up. When the final decisions come down about staffing, I want to make sure your name is at the top of the keep list." As Gregory walked to his car, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he was on the right path. And for now, that was enough. The boardroom of Meridian Financial Services was silent, the tension palpable as the members of the Internal Audit Committee exchanged looks. At the head of the table, CEO Marcus Blackwell's face was a mask of barely contained fury. "Let me get this straight," he growled, glaring at the head auditor. "You're telling me that 2 of our employees have been embezzling funds for over a year, and we're just now finding out about it?" The auditor, a thin man named Jenkins, swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. The scheme was quite sophisticated, but once we received the anonymous tip and knew where to look, the evidence was overwhelming." Blackwell's fist came down hard on the table, making everyone jump. I want names. Now. Natasha Reed and James Humphrey, sir, from the Accounts Receivable Department. Across town, oblivious to the storm about to break over their heads, Natasha and James were having lunch at their favorite cafe. Natasha was in the middle of regaling James with her latest verbal sparring match with Gregory when her phone buzzed. "Probably Jameson again," she said with a roll of her eyes. "That man is relentless. I swear, if Greg would just—" Her voice trailed off as she read the message. All the color drained from her face. "Natasha?" James leaned forward, concern etching his features. "What is it?" She looked up at him, her eyes wide with panic. "We have to go. Now." But it was too late. As they stood to leave, two men in dark suits approached their table. "Ms. Reed? Mr. Humphrey? I'm Agent Thompson with the FBI. We need you to come with us." The next few days were a blur of interrogations, accusations, and crushing realizations. The evidence against them was insurmountable. Not only were they fired from Meridian, but they were now facing serious criminal charges. As Natasha sat in her lawyer's office, listening to him outline the potential plea deals and prison sentences, her mind wandered to Gregory. How had it all gone so wrong? The affair, which had seemed so exciting and liberating, now felt like the biggest mistake of her life. Meanwhile, Gregory was in his classroom, wrapping up a particularly engaging lesson on the civil rights movement when Tom Halsey appeared at the door. "Greg, can I see you for a moment?" Gregory's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. But as he stepped into the hallway, he was surprised to see Tom smiling. "I've got good news," Tom said. "Not only are we keeping you on, but we want to offer you a permanent position, full benefits, tenure track, the works." Gregory blinked, stunned. Are you serious?" Tom nodded. "Your work these past few months has been exceptional. The students love you, the parents respect you, and quite frankly, we'd be idiots to let you go. So, what do you say?" For a moment, Gregory couldn't speak. All the stress, all the uncertainty of the past months came crashing down, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief and vindication. Yes. Of course, yes. Thank you, Tom." As Gregory walked back to his classroom, his phone buzzed. It was Michael. "It's over, Greg. Natasha's lawyer called. They're accepting our original settlement offer. With everything that's happened, she's in no position to fight anymore." Gregory leaned against the wall, letting the news wash over him. It was finally, truly over. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind. Gregory finalized the divorce, signed his new contract with the school, and even managed to find a slightly larger apartment that he could now afford. As he settled into his new life, Gregory found himself reflecting on the tumultuous journey he'd been through, the betrayal, the pain, the uncertainty. It had all shaped him in ways he was only beginning to understand. One afternoon, as he was preparing for his classes, an idea struck him. He quickly jotted down some notes, a spark of excitement growing as the concept took shape. The next day, he approached Tom with a proposal, an elective course on financial literacy and ethics. Tom raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting combination." Gregory nodded eagerly. "I know it sounds odd, but think about it. So many of our students graduate without any real understanding of how to manage their money or navigate the ethical challenges of the adult world. This course could change that." Tom considered for a moment, then smiled. "You know what? Let's do it. If anyone can make finance and ethics exciting for teenagers, it's you, Greg." As the new school year began, Gregory found himself standing in front of a packed classroom. Students had flocked to his new elective, curious about the unorthodox combination of topics. "Welcome to Financial Literacy and Ethics 101, Gregory began, looking out at the sea of eager faces. "In this class, we're going to learn about more than just balancing checkbooks and understanding credit scores. We're going to explore the complex relationship between money and morality, and how the choices we make can impact not just our bank accounts, but our integrity, As he launched into the first lesson, Gregory felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. He was using his pain, his experience, to help these young people avoid the pitfalls he'd encountered. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but in many ways, it was better. Months passed, and Gregory found himself settling into a new rhythm. His course was a hit, with students and parents alike praising its practical and ethical approach. He'd made new friends among his colleagues, joined a local hiking club, and even started dabbling in photography, a hobby he'd always wanted to pursue but never found the time for during his marriage. One evening, as Gregory was grading papers in his apartment, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat as he read the message. "I made a horrible mistake. Can we talk? Natasha." Gregory stared at the screen, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through him. For a brief moment, he was transported back to that night, where his world had fallen apart. Natasha's cruel laughter as she walked out the door, the crushing realization that their 14 years together had meant nothing to her. But as quickly as the memories came, they faded. Gregory looked around his apartment, at the stacks of student papers, the photography books on his coffee table, the hiking boots by the door. This was his life now, hard-won and honest. With a small, rueful smile, Gregory typed his reply. "No, we can't. Goodbye, Natasha." He hit send, then blocked the number. For good measure, he turned off his phone entirely. Standing up, Gregory walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. A new day was ending, but for Gregory, it felt like a beginning. He grabbed his camera bag and headed for the door. There was a spot in the nearby park he'd been meaning to photograph at sunset. As he stepped outside, Gregory took a deep breath of the crisp evening air. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly free. Free from the shadows of betrayal. Free from the weight of a failed marriage. Free to become the man he was always meant to be. Gregory Reed walked into the gathering twilight, ready to capture the beauty of the moment and of the countless moments yet to come in his new life. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Yes, my wife cheated on me, and indeed, she left me for another man. Initially, I was consumed by rage and wished to damage both of them. However, that never materialized. Nevertheless, I acknowledge this might appear as a revenge story, though that was never my intention. I'm Randy Clipson, just an ordinary guy. I'm not a handsome figure, and a significant portion of my life was marked by excess weight. A shift occurred in high school due to my involvement in football, earning me the nickname Chipper. They used to say that if I chipped someone, they were going down. At 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighing 260 pounds, playing football was somewhat expected. While not excelling as an athlete, I possessed substantial upper body strength even in high school, enabling me to push defensive linemen backward. Football proved instrumental throughout my 4 school years, aiding in shedding the excess fat I had carried for most of my life. Despite retaining a bit of a belly, the accumulated muscle more than compensated. Nonetheless, having been overweight for most of my life, the self-perception as a fatty lingered. Coupled with this mindset, I was painfully shy due to constant weight-related teasing during grade and middle school. In high school, being a football player shielded me from such mockery, and it came with certain privileges, no longer making me an outcast among the girls. Despite not attracting cheerleaders, some girls were willing to go out with me. Nonetheless, I didn't engage in much dating until my senior year, when I crossed paths with Cindy. Cindy Crawley transferred to our school in the latter part of my junior year, but she caught my attention only in senior year. Despite possessing the most beautiful face I had ever seen, Cindy carried at least 30 to 40 pounds of extra weight. This deterred most boys in my class, and I regret to admit that I initially shared that lack of interest. Our connection deepened when we became chemistry partners. While the subject was complicated for me, Cindy excelled and provided significant assistance. I owe her for my success in chemistry, which likely paved the way for my college journey. During our partnership, I discovered Cindy's friendly and humorous nature, along with a shared background of starting school late. Cindy had overcome a congenital heart defect, and I was held back a year by my parents, making both of us 19. Summoning all my courage, I decided to ask her out, understanding her initial suspicion given her challenging past. Despite her reluctance, she agreed to go out with me. Our first date, a simple outing to the movies followed by an ice cream soda, was enjoyable. However, my shyness prevented me from attempting to kiss her. Instead, I shook her hand and asked if I could call her, and her thrilled reaction led to several subsequent dates over the next few weeks. By the third date, I summoned the courage to give Cindy a kiss on the cheek, progressing to necking and reaching first base. The more I encountered Cindy, the more my affection for her deepened. While my developing romance was progressing, the football season took an unexpected turn. Cavern High, my high school, wasn't renowned for football prowess, but this season brought a surprising alignment of stars. Kirk Simmons, our standout quarterback, led the team with the Bailey twins, Todd and Jason, serving as our running backs. Now positioned as the left tackle, I successfully shielded Kirk's blindside, ensuring he remained unsacked. Despite losing our initial game to Mohawk High with a score of 21-17, a perennial football powerhouse, we rebounded with 7 consecutive wins, progressing to the regionals. Although we reached the state finals and suffered a 28-14 defeat from Towson High, there was a positive note, triumphing over Mohawk High in the semifinals with a satisfying 38-7 victory. My apologies for the occasional indulgence in reminiscing about the glory days of high school football. Meanwhile, my relationship with Cindy continued, evolving to the next level. As prom season approached, I promptly invited Cindy to be my date. Her joyful acceptance was sealed with a big, affectionate kiss. Over the 4 weeks leading up to the prom, Cindy underwent a crash diet, shedding about 20 pounds to fit into the prom dress she had acquired. When I picked her up for the prom, my eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Despite being what most guys might consider on the heavier side, I found her stunning. Cindy always had a generous bust, but it became more pronounced in that light blue prom dress. The dress struggled to contain her chest, which threatened to spill over. The entire evening was a dream as we danced together. As the night concluded, I suggested going parking, but Cindy had different plans, directing me to a wooded area about 30 miles outside of town. Cindy explained that her uncle had a small cabin he used for hunting. The cabin was indeed small, featuring only a tiny kitchen, a couch in front of a television, a bed, and a bathroom. We started on the sofa with our usual playfulness, concluding the night on a high note, despite our extracurricular activities. I got Cindy back home 15 minutes before her 2 a.m. curfew. Cindy and I remained close throughout the rest of high school, engaging in a physical relationship while being cautious with protection. Following graduation, I received a partial football scholarship at a Division II school 2 states away, while Cindy opted for a local community college. My major was computer science, and hers was psychology. Since I was heading off to school, we discussed what to do about our relationship. By mutual agreement, we decided to break up, feeling it wouldn't be fair to hold each other back. It was the toughest decision I had ever made. I can't even explain how awful I felt going off to school and leaving Cindy behind. She told me that if we were meant to be together, it would happen. I was terrified of losing her and hurting so badly. Upon my arrival at Mountain Ridge University, the thought of heading straight home crossed my mind, but I couldn't go back on my commitment. I had pledged to honor my commitment to the university, and my strong desire for a college education fueled my determination. The only solution I could think of was immersing myself in football practices and schoolwork. From morning till night, I dedicated myself to keeping my mind occupied. Despite the coach's advice against it, my coaches and teachers were impressed by my work ethic. Taking a full load of classes, being a college football player meant shedding fat and building muscle through intensive weight training, resulting in both upper and lower body strength. With only a partial scholarship, my parents covered the remaining balance, even though I knew they struggled with the cost. Playing football left me with no means to contribute financially. While I lacked funds to come home, I made a weekly call to Cindy, who appeared as devastated by our split as I was. My first college year concluded successfully, excelling in both football and academics. By the third game of the season, I earned a spot in the starting lineup, shifting to play left guard due to my slower speed. My increased strength proved beneficial, contributing to our 8-2 season record. Academically, I ended the year on the dean's list, much to my parents' delight. During the summer, Cindy and I resumed our relationship. I found myself deeply in love with her, or so I believed at the time. Reflecting on it, I've questioned whether it was love or just lust. After careful consideration, I lean towards love, as a small part of me still holds affection for her. I worked and took 3 online courses during the summer, determined to finish college as soon as possible. Cindy and I also resumed our bed activities, exploring each other's bodies whenever possible. I completed college in 3 years and married Cindy right after graduation. Both employed by the multinational software and electronics company Triorbit Electronics in Virginia, we worked in software development and human resources, respectively. After saving enough money, we purchased a small house and began discussing starting a family. The first 3.5 years of our marriage were wonderful, except for one aspect. We both gained a significant amount of weight. Cindy reached 230 pounds, and I weighed in at 310 pounds. I carried the extra weight better due to my height, but neither of us was content with the excess pounds. Despite unsuccessful attempts at dieting, my love for Cindy remained unwavering, regardless of her size. After 3 years of marriage with no kids, we consulted our family doctor. Following a series of tests, he found nothing wrong with either of us, but suggested weight loss might aid Cindy's conception. So for the first time in our lives, we embarked on a strict diet. 6 months later, Cindy was down 50 pounds. I was only down about 25, but I must admit that I cheated more than I should have. Cindy's weight loss was noticeable, attracting attention from men. Alongside the diet, Cindy began going to the gym 5 days a week. Observing her transformation, I realized I had to step up my efforts. I strictly adhered to our diet and started hitting the gym with her. At the end of 1 year of dieting, Cindy had shed 80 pounds, and I had lost 90. While we both felt really good about ourselves, sadly, our weight loss was going to bring me a broken heart. As Cindy continued to lose weight, she started dressing in more revealing clothing. Initially enjoyable, I became displeased when I overheard some comments at work. However, I couldn't say anything because, for her whole life, Cindy had been an ugly duckling. Now she had turned into a beautiful swan. The real problem for me arose when Kirk Simmons was appointed head of human resources. He was now a senior director of the company. I was just a senior programmer, and he was now 2 levels above me, becoming Cindy's boss. Initially, I didn't think much of it. Kirk was married to Susie Looper, who had been a cheerleader in high school. I had seen her at company functions, and she was still quite attractive. Hardly noticing her, I ended up dancing with her at my wife's request, as she danced with her boss. During a Christmas party, I danced a few times with Susie, while Kirk partnered with Cindy. Dancing just beside her, I found myself becoming noticeably excited. It wasn't a big deal, though, as still being in my 20s, any pretty girl could elicit the same response. One surprising aspect was that she wasn't a stuck-up snob, which pleased me. Upon Kirk and I arriving, I didn't recognize you or Cindy. Susie complimented us, expressing that we looked fabulous. My perception of Cindy's beauty had always been high, but now she was truly stunning. I mentioned, somewhat embarrassed, that someone should keep an eye on her. The response was a simple thank you. I expressed gratitude for Susie's kindness, and she blushed in response. The music concluded, and around 5 months before our 4th anniversary, Cindy revealed a significant decision. She informed me of her choice to resume taking birth control pills. I raised objections, inquiring about our plans for having children. She straightforwardly mentioned that she had decided not to have any at the moment. My anger surfaced as I probed into her abrupt decision. She reassured me, stroking my arm, stating, "Look, we'll have kids. I just don't want to get fat again. I want to enjoy being slim for a while." In hindsight, I should have recognized the problem at that moment, but I was clueless, having complete trust in Cindy. Unfortunately, my trust in Kirk was misplaced, as I could trust him as far as I could throw a bus. Unbeknownst to me, Kirk had put on a full-court press to get Cindy. She, of course, was flattered beyond belief that the former football captain of our high school team was pursuing her. I first became concerned when Cindy began working late, and then going supposedly out with girlfriends. I was genuinely clueless about these things, but I'm not stupid. When Cindy started coming in later and later, I became suspicious. I didn't want to believe that she was cheating on me, but I couldn't ignore the signs. I hired a PI company, and within a week, they had all the evidence I needed. They had a video of Cindy and Kirk engaging in a lovemaking act in the office. How they obtained that, I have no idea. They had pictures of them being affectionate at dinner. Videos showed Kirk coming to my house while I was at work. Lastly, there were pictures of them engaging in a lovemaking act on our living room floor. I knew they took those through the front window of our house. Remember when I said that I couldn't really describe what it was like having closeness with Cindy the first time? Well, I have no words to explain the pain that I felt finding out that my wife was cheating on me. Not only that, but she was cheating with someone who had been a friend of mine. Granted, Kirk and I were not close, but I had still considered him a friend. It hurt unbelievably. I still held out hope that once I confronted Cindy, she would come to her senses. I was in love with her, and I thought she was still in love with me. I took the evidence home that night, and after dinner, I told Cindy we needed to talk. She looked at me curiously, but sat at the kitchen table to listen. Cindy immediately turned white and then buried her face in her hands. She started to cry and ran to the bathroom. I went and knocked on the door, but she refused to open it. I waited in the kitchen with a glass of rum. Finally, she came out and sat down at the kitchen table with her head down. I spoke coldly, asking what the other person had to say. She mentioned that she didn't intend for it to happen, speaking in a voice just above a whisper. Cindy reacted, expressing disapproval and stating that there was no need for crudeness. She implied that if I had paid more attention to her, the situation might have been avoided. Initially taken aback, I briefly considered whether I had neglected her. However, my anger resurfaced, and I asserted that she shouldn't try to shift blame. I maintained my innocence and confronted her about the affair, asking for her explanation. She looked nervously at me but remained silent. I pressed further, inquiring about our next steps. Struggling to control my anger, I questioned whether she wanted to be with Kirk or with me. Despite expressing love for me, she tearfully admitted to also loving Kirk. I conveyed that a decision needed to be made, almost biting my tongue. I set a deadline, insisting on knowing her choice by the next day. If she chose to stay with me, she would have to sever ties with Kirk, resign from her job, and commit to attending counseling. Cindy acknowledged this. Later, I retrieved all her belongings, placing them in the hall, and informed her that she could sleep in the guest room until she made up her mind. The next day, I returned home early from work. The truth was that I couldn't concentrate and was less than useless. My stomach had been doing flip-flops all day. At one point during the morning, I thought I was going to lose what little breakfast I had eaten. About 6 o'clock, Cindy came in with a very nervous look on her face. I was sitting at the kitchen table as I had the previous night. She took a seat across from me, and I demanded to know if she had made up her mind. Tears started to flow down her cheek as she expressed her love for me, but admitted an inability to give up Kirk, stating that she loved him too. I sighed deeply, attempting to conceal the fact that my heart was breaking. Acknowledging her choice, she simply nodded, causing a pain deeper than if someone had stabbed me. My brain was about to explode. I was going back and forth at 1,000,000 miles an hour between eliminating them both and curling up in the corner and crying my eyes out. I sarcastically remarked that she had chosen quite the winner. Bringing up Kirk and Susie's new baby boy, I questioned whether it bothered her to leave the child without a father. A hint of anger and shame crossed Cindy's face as she mentioned that Kirk had planned to divorce Susie before their involvement. Continuing, I asked if she was willing to discard almost 4 years of marriage just like that. Struggling to contain both my temper and tears, I sought an understanding of her decision. To be truthful, right then, I was seriously considering smacking Cindy to a pulp and then go look for Kirk to break his neck. She softly expressed regret for any hurt caused, her voice tender. She clarified that she hadn't intended for it to happen, but had fallen deeply in love with Kirk, and he felt the same way. She asserted the need to be with him. Despite feeling an intense urge to damage her at that moment, I recognized the importance of maintaining control. It required all my self-control, but I eventually succeeded. Deep within the logical part of my brain, I recognized that resorting to physical violence would yield nothing. I refrained from revealing the depth of her hurt and refused to beg her to stay, considering it the worst thing a cheated-on husband can do, a sign of total weakness. I plainly stated that if the other person desired a divorce, they would have it. Confusion filled her eyes, and perhaps I imagined it, a hint of hurt. She might have expected me to fight to keep her, but I knew that if she had decided to leave, there was nothing I could do or say to stop her. Cindy was taken aback by my behavior, but rose and started packing her belongings. The following day, I visited the bank and our financial advisor, explaining the situation and withdrawing half the funds from each account. I then established separate accounts in my name only, canceled all our credit cards, and applied for new ones solely in my name. I listed our house for sale through a realtor friend and finally consulted a divorce lawyer. With a heart full of hatred, I ensured Cindy was served at work, citing infidelity as the cause. The divorce proceedings were relatively straightforward. With only about 4 years of marriage and no children, there was nothing to dispute. We split everything evenly and went our separate ways. Kirk's divorce was messier, dealing with a child under a year old, and Susie having never worked. He faced child support and alimony. One aspect of Kirk's divorce that admittedly brought me some satisfaction was his decision to cut costs on his lawyer. Instead of limiting spousal maintenance to a year or two, it was set at 15 years. Kirk wasn't pleased, but he signed the papers. 2 months after the divorces were finalized, Kirk and Cindy got married. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The initial week post-breakup left me utterly lost. Not being much of a drinker, that held no appeal. For weeks, revenge consumed my thoughts. I'm sure every guy who's been cheated on can relate. I even began searching the internet for information on how ex-husbands sought revenge on their former wives and lovers. I found myself in a dark place, even purchasing a weapon. Then, as I read story after story about guys getting revenge, a shift occurred in my perspective. Initially, my thoughts of revenge were centered on violence. Subsequently, I considered damaging their property, contemplating ideas like flattening all their tires, putting sugar in their gas tanks, flooding their new house, and various other impractical schemes. As I read more revenge stories, I recognized the absurdity in most of them, realizing no feasible way to achieve the revenge I desired. Eventually, I sought counseling at my church. The pastor spent almost 2 hours explaining that seeking revenge wouldn't alleviate the hurt from my wife's betrayal. Regardless of how much pain I inflicted on my former wife or her new husband, the emotional anguish would persist. The pastor's advice, though seemingly simple for someone with my kind of pain, emphasized that only time and distance would heal my heart. Despite my initial skepticism, I acknowledged that being near Cindy without the possibility of being with her would continually reopen the emotional wound. I also accepted the pastor's truth about revenge. It wouldn't alleviate the hurt. Consequently, I followed his counsel, necessitating the establishment of distance between Cindy and me. An opportunity arose when I heard rumors that the company was in trouble. Apparently, the firm had entered into a contract with the Defense Department. The deal promised significant profits, but there was a downside. Our firm was charged with developing an entirely new software and electronics package for the Air Force's fighters and bombers. It's entirely classified, so I can't provide details. Suffice to say, it aimed to position the United States ahead of Russia and China, contingent on my company's successful delivery. The rumor circulating was that the project was significantly behind and over budget, making it different from typical government contracts. While substantial profits were at stake, the company faced great risk. Unlike other government projects, there would be no progress payments during the development of this software and its accompanying electronic components. Tremendous penalties loomed for late delivery, and the company could possibly go under if the project didn't meet the contract requirements. As one of the senior software designers, I was called in to consult on the impending disaster. Most other designers were hesitant to get involved, updating their resumes, and considering leaving the company. Taking on the project meant risking termination and potential company collapse. The stigma of failure would linger for a long time. However, considering my modest needs post-divorce, the prospect of losing my job seemed manageable. Learning that Cindy was pregnant added emotional weight, as I had always envisioned starting a family with her. Evaluating the project data provided, it became clear that the chosen direction wouldn't work. Despite the risks, I agreed to take on the assignment and headed for California, putting about 3,000 miles between my ex-wife and me, reminiscent of my first year in college. I delved into my work, enduring long days, sometimes spanning 20 hours, leaving little time to contemplate Cindy. I terminated 3/4 of the programmers and all engineers handling electronic components, bringing in fresh talent. Despite the looming 11-month deadline, I scrapped their progress, relying on the creativity of engineers I brought on board, including some poached from rival companies. Their skepticism turned to astonishment when I explained what I wanted them to build and why I envisioned the electronic components in that particular way. Yet, the challenge shifted to making the software functional. Gradually, we crafted a program that instilled confidence in me. It wasn't until 3 weeks before delivering our product to the military that I was certain of our success. The initial test, merging the software and electronic components, displayed a 96% success rate. Scanning the 4% that hadn't worked, I identified easy fixes. The revelation of our program's success triggered a surge in company stocks by over 300 points within a couple of months. Subsequently, the Defense Department announced the expansion of our contract to include the Navy, Army, and Marines, forecasting billions in profits. The success didn't halt there. I recognized the potential to tweak the program for various commercial applications. Essentially, we removed all classified information, creating an outstanding platform for practical uses. The array of things adaptable to this program seemed boundless. Following this triumph, I earned a promotion to Senior Vice President, tasked with developing these commercial applications. In the years that followed, frequent returns to the Virginia home office never led to encounters with Kirk or Cindy. Despite not anticipating any impact on me, I desired no contact, having nothing to convey to either of them. The pastor's counsel about putting time and distance between heartbreak had proven 100% accurate. I had moved on. During one visit, I unexpectedly met Kelly Bailey, a former cheerleader from Cavern High and Susie's best friend. Aware of her marriage to Jason Bailey and having a son before I met Cindy, I always harbored a crush on Kelly. The prettiest cheerleader, Kelly's warm demeanor in high school made her impossible not to like. Although she had aged somewhat, she remained physically attractive. In contrast to Cindy's short blonde hair and ample figure, Kelly, standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, had long black hair and proportionally smaller chest. A shared warmth in their smiles was the commonality. Stunned that she recognized me in a grocery store preparing for a board presentation, we exchanged smiles. Despite a few gray hairs and small wrinkles, I still had a slight crush. Kelly called out to me as I pondered over frozen dinners. Upon recognizing her voice, I blushed slightly. She then stopped her basket next to mine, and I greeted her with a smile, expressing my flattery at her recognition. She confessed that she wouldn't have recognized me if Susie hadn't pointed me out during lunch at Tri-Orbit. I was genuinely surprised when she mentioned that. She then smiled and confirmed that she had been working at Tri-Orbit for about 6 years, specifically in the marketing department. It surprised me to learn that Kelly worked at the same company as me. I felt a twinge of guilt for not knowing that. However, since I had little involvement with marketing, I shouldn't have felt bad. Still, I felt like I should have been aware. "How are you doing?" I eventually asked to ease my discomfort. "I'm doing as well as can be expected," she replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. "I'm divorced now. Jason has turned out to be a real idiot. Not only was he cheating with his secretary, but also with half a dozen other women. He even got one of them pregnant. I divorced him, of course. He got off pretty lightly considering what he was doing. There was no alimony because our salaries are about the same. We didn't own a house and had very little savings. All he was ordered to do was pay child support. Still, I have to hassle him for it every month. I don't mind bugging him to get the money, but he totally ignores our son Scott. I get furious when I think about it," she said. I apologized to Kelly, expressing regret over Jason's behavior. I admitted that although I was aware he had a wild side, I had hoped he would calm down after marriage. Pausing for a moment, I looked into Kelly's emerald green eyes, feeling unsure of what to say next. Eventually, I mentioned that my wife and I were divorced, with Cindy choosing to pursue Todd. "No, Randy," Kelly shook her head. "It was Kirk who pursued Cindy. Susie told me all about it." "I suppose I can't argue with that," I admitted, but it takes two to tango. You're not seriously thinking about eating any of these frozen dinners, are you? She asked, eyeing my cart. Yeah, I'm afraid so, I nodded. I'm a terrible cook, and this is about all I can handle. Look, if you'd like a home-cooked meal, why don't you come over to my house? It won't be fancy, but I guarantee it will be good. Initially, I hesitated, but the idea of a home-cooked meal proved too tempting to resist. I mentioned that I wouldn't mind having a real meal if it wasn't too much trouble. I couldn't recall the last time I had one. The evening turned out to be delightful. Kelly made meatloaf with mashed potatoes, string beans, and sherbet for dessert. It was enjoyable having someone to converse with. Scotty, as his mother called him, was a very outgoing and friendly kid. I discovered that he was a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan like me. We had a great time discussing the team and their prospects for the upcoming season. I was a die-hard fan and also a season ticket holder. In fact, I had 4 season tickets on the 50-yard line. The company covered them because I would take potential clients to the games. When I didn't have any clients, I'd invite my buddies, and if I couldn't find anyone to go with me, I'd go alone. I'd give away the other 3 tickets, usually to people trying to buy from a scalper. Scotty expressed a wish to attend a game someday, sounding wistful. In response, I impulsively offered to make it happen. Once the words left my mouth, I realized I had overstepped and swiftly attempted to rectify it. That is, of course, if your mother approves. Scotty turned to his mother with imploring eyes. All she said is, "We'll discuss it at the end of the evening," I apologized. "I'm sorry about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offer. It slipped out before I realized. But just so you know, I have 4 season tickets to all the Bucs home games and a ton of frequent flyer miles. If you wouldn't mind him attending a game with me, I'd be thrilled to take him." She stood there with piercing eyes, and I realized that I had made another mistake. Quickly, I attempted to rectify it, but only ended up making another blunder. After a brief pause, I stuttered out that the invitation also extended to her. I suggested securing separate rooms, with one for Kelly and Scotty and another for myself. Despite feeling embarrassed, Kelly simply smiled and called me the sweetest man while chuckling. She remarked that my expression was priceless. Feeling relieved, I sighed, as I truly didn't want to offend her. I enjoyed her company and hoped we could meet up from time to time. Deciding to push ahead, I said, "Would you mind if I asked you out when I come to town? If you're with someone, I'll understand. I just really enjoyed having someone to talk to." Kelly studied me for a moment, then smiled. "Randy, I've known you since high school. I always thought you were cute and one of the nicest guys, but never considered dating you because I had Jason. Now that I've gotten to know you a little, yes, I'd be pleased if you called me, and I'd love to go see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with you and Scotty." Over the following year, I'd call Kelly every time I returned to Virginia, and we'd get together several times. I booked trips back east when I really didn't have to be there. It wasn't a love affair at first. We were just good friends who enjoyed spending time together. I took Kelly and Scotty to the final game of the season that year. The Bucs needed to win to make it into the playoffs, and they did. Scotty was beside himself with joy over the win that night. After Scotty went to bed, Kelly came over to my room, and we became more than just good friends. When Kelly knocked on my door unexpectedly, I was engrossed in watching a local sports station analyze the Bucs game. Concerned, I asked if everything was all right, particularly about Scotty's well-being. Kelly reassured me with a smile that nothing was wrong and that Scotty was sleeping peacefully, excited about the playoffs. She expressed a desire to have a drink and talk. Feeling a bit underdressed in my boxer shorts and t-shirt, I mentioned that I needed to put on some pants before inviting her in. However, upon searching for my trousers, I realized they weren't where I thought I had left them. Kelly said there was no need for pants as she pushed the door open and entered the room hurriedly. As I continued searching for my pants without success, Kelly giggled at the situation, causing my face to flush red with embarrassment. She then suggested putting us on an even playing field if I felt uncomfortable, and proceeded to remove her skirt, leaving us both in our underwear. With a smile, she asked me to mix her a drink and join her for a conversation. I went to the minibar, retrieving 2 small bottles of rum and 2 cans of Coke. As I mixed the drinks, Kelly climbed onto my bed and sat cross-legged, her white-laced underwear catching my attention. After handing Kelly her drink, I looked around the room for a place to sit. Sensing my hesitation, Kelly gestured towards the bed and invited me to sit beside her, reassuring me that she wouldn't bite. Despite still feeling embarrassed and red-faced, I nodded and took a seat next to her. A big swallow of my drink helped me relax as the rum coursed through my body. We talked for a while, and when we finished our drinks, I took her cup and asked if she wanted another. She shook her head, and I waited for her to get up. I figured she'd head back to her son. I was totally wrong about that. Not sure what to do, I put the cups in the wastebasket and sat down again. When I did, Kelly kissed me on the lips. It was quick and soft, sending an electrical charge through my body. She saw my surprise and smiled. "I've been waiting for months for you to kiss me. I figured that you still thought of me as that high school cheerleader who was unattainable. Let me assure you that I am not that person anymore." Kelly had read me like a book. There had been so many times that I wanted to kiss her but was afraid. I didn't want to take a chance of losing her as a friend. I leaned forward and kissed her. We kissed a long time, with our tongues exploring every part of each other's mouths. She tasted so sweet. After we parted ways, I expressed admiration, mentioning that she was a beautiful and amazing woman. Kelly then laid her head on my chest. That night of passion surpassed my first time with Cindy. 6 months after that night, Kelly and I became engaged. Scotty was thrilled that I was going to be his dad. A year after that night, we were married. Jason had been as big a turd as Kelly had claimed. He barely spoke to his son, and he really resented me. Jason was still close friends with Kirk, and every time he came to Kelly's apartment when I was there, he had to tell me how happy they were and what great closeness Kirk and Cindy were having. I guess he thought it would make me jealous. I just listened and said nothing. What I did learn was that Kirk was still heading up the human resources department for the company, but Cindy had given up her job to be a full-time mom. I was a little surprised to learn that Kirk and Cindy had 3 kids now, but it no longer bothered me at all. One time, when I heard Kelly on the phone giving Jason help for not sending the support payment, I made the mistake of telling her to forget about it. I was more than willing to pay whatever for Scotty's needs, Kelly spoke sternly, insisting that I needed to stay out of the situation. She expressed determination not to let him off the hook for child support, despite his neglect of his son. I promptly withdrew my statement, acknowledging that the money in question belonged to Scotty. In December, I was set to be appointed executive vice president of the company. The announcement was scheduled for the Christmas party at the Washington Convention Center, with around 400 to 500 attendees. I felt a bit self-conscious about the grand recognition at this event, but Kelly was overjoyed. She scolded me for complaining, insisting that I deserved the recognition. I know almost as many people in that company as you do, and they've told me story after story about how this company wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you. They also told me that you'll be the next CEO when Mel steps down next year. I responded, suggesting that it may not matter. However, she countered with a smile, mentioning that she was married to the most beautiful woman in the world and had a surprise for me. We recalled a past incident in Kansas City involving a mishap with a rubber. I acknowledged the memory with a nod, which was followed by a silly grin. She confirmed that she was pregnant now, expressing her determination to keep me close. Embracing me tightly, she expressed her desire for a bed night if we didn't have to attend the party. I confessed that I wasn't particularly fond of parties anymore, as I had to attend so many that they had lost their appeal. Kelly, however, still seemed to enjoy them, especially when I was with her. She had a certain aura that attracted people to her. We danced for a while before running into Kirk and Cindy, who were accompanied by Jason and his date Kathy. I was genuinely surprised to see Cindy's weight gain and Kirk's protruding belly, while Jason remained in good shape. I speculated that Jason might still be actively seeking romantic encounters. I was unsure what to do, but then someone began talking over the public address system. "Could I have your attention for just a moment?" I realized it was Mel Stanton, the CEO of Triorbit. "I promise I won't give a long speech. As most of you know, we've been looking to replace Charlie Bruner, our executive vice president, who retired 3 months ago. I knew who I wanted right away, but the board dithered around for 3 months. Well, after months of interviewing dozens of candidates, they finally agreed with me. I'm thrilled to announce that our new executive vice president comes from within our own organization. He has always been a tremendous asset, and now it's time he receives his just reward. I give you our next executive vice president, Randy Clipson." A spotlight was suddenly shining on me, and loud applause broke out from all around the room. Kelly pulled me to her and gave me a long, passionate kiss. When the commotion ended and the party returned to normal, I turned to where Cindy, Kirk, Jason, and his date were standing. I didn't know what to say to them. Jason seemed pissed, and jealousy filled Kirk's face. However, when I glanced at Cindy, there was a look of sadness and loss. Feeling uncertain about how to proceed, I watched as Kelly took charge. She greeted Kirk, Cindy, and Jason warmly, hugging each of them in turn. Then, she turned her attention to Kathy, extending a polite handshake and expressing pleasure in meeting her. I took my lead from my wife. I shook Kirk, Jason, and Kathy's hands, and gave Cindy a small hug. We chatted briefly, and the music began playing. In a surprising twist, Kelly suggested, "Randy, why don't you dance with Cindy, and I'll dance with my ex-husband? Kathy, why don't you and Kirk share a dance as well?" I looked at Kelly with a questioning expression, but she just smiled knowingly. So, I danced with Cindy. I asked about Kirk and Cindy's well-being because I couldn't think of anything else to say. Cindy responded that things weren't going particularly well, and mentioned that she suspected they were headed for a divorce because she believed Kirk had been unfaithful. Expressing genuine sympathy, I told her I was sorry to hear about their situation. Cindy responded skeptically, questioning whether I truly meant my apology, as she expected me to say something along the lines of, "It serves you right." I initially expressed shock at the comment, stating that I would never say such a thing. Then I realized there had been a time when I probably would have said something similar. Well, to be truthful, when we first broke up, if you'd come to me then, I probably would have said something like that. But I couldn't hate you. You were my first love, and it hurt to lose you. But life moves on, and so have I. Shortly after that, the music stopped, and tears began to stream down Cindy's face. She expressed regret, admitting that leaving me was the biggest mistake of her life, and lamenting that there was nothing she could do to rectify it. As I watched her walk away, I couldn't help but feel genuine sympathy for her. Kelly put her arm around me, prompting me to lean down and kiss her. I inquired about her dance with Jason, to which she responded with a smile, saying that he was still an idiot. He actually tried to put the moves on me. He told me that he's ready to settle down, and he'd be more than happy to take me back. I just laughed at him, and told him why would I want him when I had the greatest man in the world. I watched Cindy reach their table and sit down. Even from this distance, I could see the tears. Kirk and Jason appeared to be having a heated discussion. If I had to guess, I'd say that Kirk tried to put a move on Jason's date. I thought back to the pain I had felt when Cindy left me. Something like that never truly goes away. It's like a bad cut. It leaves a scar. I also thought of all the planning for revenge that filled me during that time. The pastor had been right. No amount of revenge would have ever stopped my pain. It indeed was time and distance that had healed me. As I said at the beginning, even though I had given up on the idea of getting revenge, I had, in fact, achieved it. My revenge was exacted in the only way that is truly meaningful to someone who has been cheated on. I was living well, loved, and totally happy.
For some, the night brings restful peace, while for others, it heralds a thrill of anticipation. As a college student, my family's home has always been a two-story haven. We used to freely roam between the floors, utilizing multiple rooms until a few years back when my father's business faced a downturn. Consequently, we installed a door on the first floor and started renting it out. Our neighborhood is bustling with companies, and though it's over a 10-minute walk to the nearest subway station, its convenient location makes it a desirable place to live. My family resides on the second floor, which houses 2 rooms, similar to the first floor, that's now leased to tenants, currently in its 3rd turnover. A newlywed couple from out of town chose our home for its cleanliness and proximity to the husband's workplace. At first, their life seemed sweet and loving until it wasn't. Loud arguments became frequent, with the husband often berating his wife. One night, as we were finishing dinner and watching Netflix, a clash erupted downstairs. The husband was accusing his wife of not answering her phone all day, too, which she retorted she had been in meetings. My mother mentioned that the husband tends to vent his frustration on his wife after drinking. The wife, Serafina, is quite beautiful with a tall, slim figure and long, neatly tied hair. She teaches children after school and is quite the introvert, usually busy with work during the day and returning home in the evening to manage household tasks. Serafina is also an excellent cook, once sharing delicious, homemade cheese tortillas with us, reminiscent of what you'd find at a taco franchise. My mother admired her for being so diligent, and they shared meals together occasionally. However, Serafina's husband seemed distrustful, unable to comprehend that his wife couldn't answer the phone during her teaching or meetings. Their disputes escalated until Serafina sought refuge in our home. Serafina's uncle, who is also her father, went downstairs after hearing about an argument she had with her spouse. Downstairs, the man questioned Serafina about why she was wearing a short skirt at home, asking if she was seeing any of her teachers at school. Serafina explained that she had ordered the skirt online, thinking her husband, who had just come home from work, would like it. However, her husband doubted her, questioning if she had worn it to school since it was delivered that morning. He had been overly attentive since they started dating, which Serafina initially enjoyed. But this attention turned into suspicion and later disbelief, even when she told the truth. This suspicion has overshadowed their newlywed bliss, making Serafina doubt if they can continue living together and regretting their marriage. Her mother took her hand and suggested she spend the night at their house. Since I snore loudly, my parents decided to sleep in the living room, offering my room to Serafina. Despite knowing she's married, I can't help but have feelings for her. She's beautiful and kind, and no one I've met on blind dates compares. I've admired her for the gentle way she interacts with everyone, including the neighborhood kids. I wish I could spend personal time with her, but I know it's not right. Yet, today felt special because Serafina came to our house, and I was thrilled, almost to the point of shouting in joy. I wanted to confront her husband for his behavior, but it's not my place to interfere in their personal matters. Serafina confided her marital issues to my mother and cried. I wanted to comfort her, but felt helpless. My mother wanted to ensure she had a safe place to rest, comforting her until she calmed down. My mother asked me to clean my room so Serafina could sleep there. I prepared the bed for her, saying, "Don't worry about it, just try to get some rest," even though it might be hard to sleep. Since it was warm, I decided to sleep on the living room sofa, and Serafina felt guilty for taking my room. So I wandered into my room half asleep after a middle-of-the-night bathroom trip. By habit, I climbed into bed and fell asleep, only to be jolted awake in the morning by a loud, "Yikes, what is this?" To our surprise, it was just the two of us who heard that. Serafina was there beside me, and as it turned out, we had ended up sharing the bed. Honestly, nothing happened between us. Serafina left early that morning for her place, and all was quiet on her end. Things remained calm for a while after that day. Serafina teaches cooking classes. One day, with only a morning class. She was heading home with a bag of pancake mix from the grocery store. At the entrance to the alley, we bumped into each other, and seeing the grocery bag, Serafina chuckled. "Making pancakes?" I replied. "It's my first time trying. Got some syrup too," she suggested, making them together at her place since she had no classes that day. I asked if it was really okay, and she reassured me that things had been fine lately, inviting me in. She mixed the pancake batter with eggs and milk in a stainless bowl, then heated a wide pan, greased it, and poured the batter in. The batter sizzled softly, turning a lovely brown. Skilled with the spatula, she flipped them until warm pancakes were ready. Encouraged to try, I clumsily made my own pancakes. Aside from instant noodles, this was my first cooking attempt. We made several pancakes, topped them with whipped cream and syrup, and added kiwi and strawberries Serafina had prepared. She brewed coffee and brought it to the table, revealing it was her birthday and was pleased to celebrate with our pancake cake. Surprised, I suggested going out for a meal later. Later, with her phone volume up, we headed to a nearby wood-fired pizza place. Serafina seemed anxious, possibly worried about a call from her husband. I couldn't understand why he would doubt such a kind and good-hearted wife. Nearly done with our pizza, she received a text saying her husband had to leave for a sudden business trip and wouldn't call that night. Serafina's face lit up with relief. Serafina was feeling a bit upset that her husband didn't wish her on her birthday. However, she mentioned going out to eat with Thaddeus brought a fresh vibe, but since her husband is the suspicious type, she insisted on heading home early. We exchanged numbers quickly and rushed back. That day, as I climbed the stairs, I hoped for another chance to meet. A week later, on the same weekday as Serafina's birthday, I bumped into her at the local grocery store's tasting section, where she was with her mother-in-law. She mentioned her mother-in-law would be staying for about 3 more days before leaving. The next day, while I was skipping rope in the yard, Serafina's mother-in-law complained of severe stomach pain. Her husband was still at work, so I hailed a taxi and took Serafina and her mother-in-law to the hospital. A week later, I met Serafina again. Her mother-in-law had gallstones and had undergone surgery to remove her gallbladder, but was now recovering well at home. Serafina had been taking care of her, putting her kids' after-school activities on hold. She said, "If it weren't for you, that is, my mother-in-law would have been in big trouble. She's so grateful to you that she insisted on thanking you personally, and even gave you some money to treat us to a meal when she gets the chance." Seizing the moment, I quickly joined them for dinner. I enjoyed my favorite seafood spaghetti and had a beer. Serafina began to vent about regretting her marriage, but I had no similar experiences to share, so I just listened. After opening up, she felt relieved and mentioned, "My husband just left for a business trip to China yesterday. He'll be gone for a month. I'm free for a while. I couldn't miss this chance," and mentioned, "Coincidentally, my parents are away for their anniversary trip to Vietnam and will be back in 3 days." That night, in my room, Serafina and I created a special atmosphere. It was a new experience for me, and she smiled patiently at my awkwardness. The next day, we spent a lovely time at her place. A year has passed since then. Serafina says her husband's attitude hasn't changed, but she finds other reasons to be happy, viewing his suspicion as a form of affection. Sharing secrets with me has become a delightful part of her life. Our secret encounters feel thrillingly delicate,